book lovers! I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna, and you are listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Check This Out is a series where I interview emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. A series brought to you by New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire. We have a lot of really exciting books and authors coming your way. Next week, we'll chat with Allison Esbach about her new novel, The Wedding People. Today, my guest is Yael van der Wouden, and we are discussing her new novel, The SAFEKEEP. This novel is set in the Dutch countryside in 1961. It takes place over just a few weeks and is written with spare, sensual prose where every single word matters. This book is filled with desire, a desire for love, and a desire to find a way to live with the past. Welcome, Yael.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here.
Yael, I'm so excited to have you here today, and I cannot wait to ask you all about your debut novel, The SAFEKEEP. And I really want to start with the idea, the nugget, how you came to write this, because I understand that The SAFEKEEP, the idea for it descended upon you. Can you talk about that?
Of course, yes. I've heard in the past sort of people describing ideas for novels or poems descend upon them, and that has never quite happened to me, not like that. And usually what happens to me is I get a grain of an idea, then it unfolds and unfolds and unfolds over a period of weeks, months, years. And with this one, it was a difficult day. I was grieving the passing of my grandparents. I was between two funerals. We were, I think, returning from my grandfather's funeral, and I was looking for a distraction. And we were in the car. I was looking out over the fields, and the idea came. The idea came to into existence. The idea of a woman in a house, another woman coming to take back what is hers, and the unfolding mystery of that. And at the same time, I wanted these two women to fall in love. It appeared out of nowhere. It descended. I think the word descended is the only way that I can explain it. And I was working on a different novel at the time, and I held on to that novel very tightly. I wanted to be good, and I wanted to be the right first novel. And I've been working on it for a few years, and I felt terrible towards that novel. I felt like I was cheating with a new hot young idea. Um, and so when I started writing The SAFEKEEP, what I did is that I did sit down with the plot and really work it out for, I think, 4 months. And every time I would do that, I would just mumble to myself, like, this is not serious. This is not I'm just playing around. I'm just, following inspiration. But here we are now.
That's amazing. A lot of writers say, unless you love what you're writing, the reader won't love it. And it sounds like you were loving it.
Yes. I mean, I'm a what I believe in very firmly is that you don't only have to love your story, you have to love every single character, even the terrible ones. One of the things that readers can sniff out immediately is when you dislike a character yourself, a character that you have written. And once they sniff out that you dislike one of your own characters, what they sense immediately as well is your presence as an author. And I do think it's a different kind of style. I think some authors very much want to be present in their books, their voice and their maybe the satirical presence. I like to disappear entirely into the wallpaper. I wanted to feel like you, the reader, have been dropped into a movie scene and that you've forgotten that anybody has written it. And in order to do that, I think I needed to fall in love with every single character just a little bit, even the terrible ones, because it needs to be the lightest touch. And the moment that you have any kind of criticism on your characters and their actions, rather than curiosity, I think that that brings you in as a writer far more loudly. And I wanted to have a lighter touch. I had this idea of what I wanted that novel to do to people, an emotion that I wanted it to create. And every time I would have somebody read it, they would read it, and then at the end they would come to me and was like, "Yeah, no, that was lovely." And I was so frustrated because it wasn't a terrible novel, but I didn't want the word lovely. I wanted something that rubbed people maybe a little bit the wrong way, in one way or another.
I hear you. I feel like the word lovely is sort of the kiss of death for a book.
Oh, yes, yes. My mother is an artist, a visual artist, and, she always says she a lot of her work is, landscapes, but some of it is also abstract, and whenever people look at her abstract work, they always say this word in Dutch, geinig, which means sort of a funny kind of lovely, and the aggression and the violence of that engenders in her the word geinig. And she always says, like, "I would much rather that people hate it, because if they hate it, at least I've created some emotion in them." And I think I very much took those words with me. Um, and so when I started writing this, it was very much a little bit in secret, as if I was keeping it secret from the other novel. And it was for several months, for 4 months, I was working and I was plodding away and I was putting all the little characters and all the little bits in order. And, when I started writing the first chapter, I said to myself, this is just a trial run. This is, an experiment. This is nothing serious. I'm just looking to see what's gonna happen." And then I started writing it in September, and by end of January, I had a first draft. I think I've sent out the first draft to a friend on February 14th because I remember it was Valentine.
That is fast.
Yes. It was so fast. It was the fastest I've ever written anything, and I don't think it will ever happen to me like that again. I mean, I know it won't because, at least the second one is definitely not that fast.
Yael, this beautiful, beautiful novel, The Safekeep, is very deep. There are many, many layers, and there's real history in it, and there's a little bit of your own family history that's woven into it as well. Can you talk about that and what it was like putting that into the book?
I think it's a family history in as much as that I'm Dutch and also I'm Jewish, although my Jewish side is Bulgarian and Romanian, in terms of background. So it's a different Jewish European, narrative. Um, but I've woven my family history into it in the sense that I've woven my Dutchness and my Jewishness and my relationship to these two things into it, and my growing up in the Netherlands and my frustration with a certain absence and a certain silence um around the people who were absent, around the people who weren't there, and the language that wasn't there anymore, that is Yiddish, which is very much still present in Dutch because a lot of Dutch words, slang words, quote unquote, are Yiddish, but the people who speak the language, who spoke the language, are no longer there. So growing up, that was something that I was always baffled by and confused by, and then later on, when I was in my early 20s, frustrated and angered by. And at the same time, I've always been fascinated by the way that the Dutch have created a narrative out of their own history and um, around the question of complicity and the question of who gets to be the hero and who gets to be the victim and who gets to be the perpetrator, which seems to be very clear cut little brackets that people put themselves into or rather put others into. And the way that I've experienced living in the Netherlands and talking to people who have grandparents, on either which side of the spectrum, more often than not, those brackets are entirely not applicable to real life experiences and how much gray area there is when it comes to complicity and victimhood and how complicated those things can become.
And you put it so beautifully into this book, The Safekeep, because you have two women who come to this sort of creepy old house. And Eva comes as presumably a stranger. And Isabel has been living in this house since she was young, right? Since basically World War II. And then we find out as the book goes on that actually Eva was there first. She was born there. She's a Jewish character. And then she was displaced. And Isabel's family comes and takes over. So really a big question in this book is whose house is it, right?
Mm.
And whose memories belong in that house, and you just wove that into the history, but as a story, which I love because, right, we read history books to know the facts, but we read fiction to know how to feel about it. So I wanted to ask you, was it hard to be writing those feelings and to be putting that into the novel?
It wasn't. I think what's hard is parsing out those feelings when you have no outlet for them. That's the hardest part. Getting to, because I have a lot of the impetus for the story, that the idea of a family being displaced and then coming back and finding their house occupied, or finding their things that they've given to somebody else to take care of. Those are stories that I grew up with within the Dutch Jewish community. There's even a word for that amongst Dutch Jewish people, which is the Waal here, which is a it's slightly it's said usually in jest. Bewaren means to keep, and Ariër is Aryan. So when you put it together, sort of you get the Aryan keepers. Um, and originally, when I got the idea for this novel, that's what I wanted the title to be. But then my Dutch publisher said, "I think that might give away the plot too much." But also, yes and no, because no one outside the Dutch Jewish community knows this word. No one uses that word. Um, and yeah, so it's a story that I've heard many, many, many times in many different iterations, be it in with homes or with things. I've walked with a friend through Amsterdam or through any other city really, and then that friend can point toward a house and say, "Oh, that used to be my family's home." Or point toward an address and say, "Oh, that's where our this and this and this the menorah is still there, or the silverware is still there." The knowledge of where the things have gone is still there. People do not forget where they disappeared to generally. And so it wasn't a foreign story to me. It wasn't something that I came up with entirely by myself. Of course, that would be something. But what I mean to say by that is that I had those stories. I've sort of I've boiled. I've been boiled within those stories, right? That's how I grew up. And then the frustration of living in a country where those stories are not acknowledged, where you don't see those stories reflected in literature or any other form of cultural production. When those stories only exist within the small community that you live within, or at least your friends and your family. And then the moment that you step out into the everyday world, as it were, uh, those stories find no echo. And that was the hard part. Putting this story into this form, into this novel, was a release, was a relief of some kind. But also because I also wanted to write this novel not from, and I think you might have noticed that it's not a book full of hate and scorn. It's not about blame. It's about how to process something like that, how to give it a place within your own history and your own way of thinking of history.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Yael van der Wouden, and we are talking about her brand new debut, The SAFEKEEP. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. So one of the things that really struck me in terms of, processing and thinking about the past was the way these two women um, basically counted everything in the house, right? So they would count the spoons or slowly steal. Eva would steal the spoons because she was taking back what was her mother's, and Isabel is counting because she wants to keep what she thinks is her mother's. And those objects were symbols that were so much stronger than just spoons. How did you think about those objects? So you have the house as a place, but then there's the things within it also. How did you think about those?
I I think that comes in part from how I wanted the characters to experience loss. I mean, also I wanted to bring them together as well, because they find each other in a way that but I always say it's when, because I think a lot of people, a lot of readers who've read it, it takes a little while for people to get behind the love story element of it. Not everyone. Some people are on board immediately, but for some people, it takes a little moment. And sometimes I get the question of why what why would you bring these two people together? And the way that I see it and the way that I feel it, is that there's not a single person out there who will understand their loss the way that they understand each other's loss. And there's no one out there who will understand their obsession with the house the way that they understand their own obsession with the house. I always say it's like it's good that they find each other because you don't want them on the dating market, these 2, really. They are not they're not I don't think they'll make anybody else happy. But one of the reasons why I wanted the connection to the house for both of them, but also this obsessive nature, with the things and with the space itself, is I wanted them both to have either experienced the loss of it or have lived their entire lives with a fear of the loss of it. And that's a big part of also how they come together. And for myself, from my own history with things and homes and all of that, uh, when I moved out of my parents' place, in my early 20s, I did not know. I mean, as most young people don't, I didn't know how to make a home out of a space. And so what I did, I think a little experimentally, a little bit desperately, a little bit pathologically, is stuff my tiny, tiny little room with things that I found at charity shops, at antique shops. I had 6 different wallpapers. I had like an antique, probably haunted wardrobe, drapings from the ceiling. I mean that when we have that scene when in the first chapter when they all go to Luis's apartment and Ava has redecorated it and there's all these drapings. That was just me criticizing an older version of myself that had draped everything full just in order to make a space cozy. But in doing that, I of course sort of became a low key hoarder, and I think that desire comes from this idea, and that of course has to do with stage capitalism to a degree. But with this idea that in order to project our identity to the world, in order to put our identity into something that is stable and static, we must find things that represent who we are. And those things have to be stalled out for somebody to see so that the moment they come into our homes, they can see, this is who you are. Um, and that can be done with a, big flat screen television to signify either wealth or, an investment in culture or, and I think for me, I wanted as a young 20 something, I wanted to really much signify to the world that I was multifaceted and also that I could invest in things because I didn't have the money. I think that's also an important element when you don't have a lot of money, when you live, paycheck to paycheck, cent to cent, in order to show your identity in ways that isn't the big television screen. You spend tiny little amounts of money on the smallest things that you can find.
So your characters, you think, are also, these things are ways to represent that?
Yeah, yes. I think the characters, I think I took that element of my personality where I for a long time believed that or not believe that. It was a way to find stability and control in a world where I couldn't afford much and I didn't have much freedom. Um if you go to a charity shop, right, and you can buy actually one of the things that I bought and I found it recently and I've stalled it out. It's not here because we just moved is a little, tile with a hair on it, and when I was, starting to write the book, I saw that tile nearby, and I was like, "It's gonna be hairs." Um, the motif, but it's a way to still participate, right, in this, culture where our identities are defined through consumption. Also this idea, like, this is static and this will not go anywhere. And when your identity and your safety in the world feels very much, unstable, I think things are something that we can hold on to and project on our notions of safety onto. And I think this is what both of these characters do.
Yael, let's dig into the characters. We've talked a lot about the house. We've talked about the history, right? And this crazy situation. We have these two women in 1961. They're in the Dutch countryside and they are sharing this house and they both feel ownership over the house and everything in it. Let's talk about these women. Let's start with Isabel because she's the first one that we meet. She's like a love hate character. Tell us about her. How do you feel about her?
Whenever somebody says love hate, I'm always very much aware that there's a lot of people who very much identify with Isabel. And then there's people who absolutely despise her. So I don't, I think there's a lot in her to indeed either love or despise. Um, I with Isabel, I try to take um the worst of Calvinism and some of my own neuroses, and then I wondered to myself what would happen if I would extrapolate all of these, if I would expand them as make them as much of a character as possible. Um, and at the same time, also this question of what would happen if I have a character that does not care at all about um, how people perceive her. And I mean, of course, she cares a lot, but at the same time, she says whatever she wants to say. She's incredibly rude. She has not been socialized very, very well. She's been locked up in this house for most of her life. She went to school, and then that's basically the beginning and end of her socialization. Her mother did not teach her that much about how to about bedside manners. Let's put it like that. Um, and so she's only ever had herself to contend with. Both of her brothers left when she was quite young, and from the age of more or less 17, it's just been her by herself for a while with her mother, and then her mother passes away. She has a dog, the dog also dies. And so she has this curious connection to the outside world, which is very much revolves around this idea of abandonment. uh, Everyone that she loves abandons her one way or another, either because they just leave or because they have found something that they desire more than they desire her in a way, which doesn't help her self-esteem. So she's built this huge wall around herself, and that is where we come to know her, how we come to know her at the beginning of the book.
So she's about 30 when we meet her, and she feels very cold, she's repressed, she hasn't really discovered anything about her sexuality. And as I was reading her character, I kept sort of rooting for her. I wanted her to come out of the shell, right? Like, I kept waiting for this moment where she would, like, burst out in song and leave, right, all of this weight that she feels behind.
I think you would have to wait a very long time if you want Isabel to sing. However, I do have this personal fantasy that at the end of the book, she takes up piano lessons for the young kids in the nearby town.
I love that because she just seems so tight and so repressed in every feeling. And then we sort of have a mirror opposite. You introduce us to Eva, and Eva is the girlfriend, Isabel's brother's girlfriend, who sort of finds her way into the house for the summer. And we have these two women living together. Tell us about Eva.
Ava is indeed, as you said, right, the complete opposite. She is loud where Isabel is maybe not soft spoken, but at least is very restrained in her speech. She is not well dressed, which Isabel despises. Her hair is badly dyed, which Isabel also despises. She is loud. She laughs a lot. She sleeps in. She wakes up late. And worst of all, she touches things that are supposed to be Isabel's.
And that drives Isabel crazy, right? Because that house is her universe, and she doesn't want anybody in it, let alone touching it. And Ava's walking around saying, in her head, this was her house. This is where she grew up. So she's touching everything sort of nostalgically, although we don't know that until the end.
So indeed, right? So Ava comes in and disrupts this. very contained world that Isabel has made for herself. And like I said before, right, Isabel has grown up with these notions of when you love somebody, they will leave you eventually. There's no safety in any single person telling you that they love you and that they will stay. And so the only thing that is safe and the only thing that you can control are things and stuff and the house around you. Although Isabel can also not control the house around her because, of course, it is in Louis's name. When he is set to marry, when he will marry, the house will go to him, and then what will happen to her? Where will she go? And so that is not even, there's no control in that. And so for Ava to come in and disrupt not only the peace, the literal quietness of the house, but also to disrupt where things go and to sleep in the mother's bedroom, which is holy to Isabel in one way or another. Um, is a huge representation of a complete disruption of everything that Isabel her entire life. Like, she doesn't have any hobbies, she doesn't have friends or lovers. The house is everything that she has, and when this woman comes in and disrupts the house, she disrupts the core of Isabel's life.
So I couldn't help but ask myself the entire time I was reading about Ava, did we ever see her real self?
Oh, I think that's absolutely for the reader to decide. I I cannot. I mean, I can tell you what I believe, but it's not about what I believe. It's about the experience of reading it because I've written the story as it existed in my mind, and the moment that it was on paper and out in the world, it is no longer my property. Speaking of property, right? But I do think that I don't the way that I wanted to leave it, the way that I wanted to end it, I didn't want it to end on a note where you're still doubting whether or not there's genuine feeling from Ava. She's not like there's no longer game to play, right? The game is ended by the end of the novel. But I do think that we need to read within the lines, especially there's this chapter toward the end, the diary chapter, where we get to see everything from Ava's perspective. And of course, she's writing it, so we're seeing it at first person through her own curated narration. So she leaves out things as well. But still, the way I hoped it would be read is not I hope that chapter would be read not as an extension of the game, but rather an insight into her true self.
I loved the diary chapter.
I loved writing it.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from NHPR. My guest today is Yael van der Wouden, and we are talking about her exquisite, brand new debut novel, The SAFEKEEP. This novel is simple on one level. It's really about two women sharing a house, two women who fall for one another while they're hiding secrets. And I think that description really belies the beauty and complexity that Yael, you have created in this book, because there's actually nothing simple about this novel. And I was wondering if you could read a page for us so we could hear your voice.
Oh, of course. So this is a scene where Ava, our guest, has gone to town and brought back a pear. And Isabel, our protagonist, is very much upset by the introduction of the pear. There was another pear left in the middle of the table, propped like a statue. Ava said, I got one for you, too. Just one. Not a bag of pears or several for the fruit basket. Just the two. One for her, one for Isabel. I don't want it, Isabel wanted to say. She said, thank you. She took the pear, put it in her pocket. Ava looked amused. You won't eat it? Later, Isabel said, and then, with a few abortive movements, fled upstairs. In her bedroom, Isabel, sitting on the edge of the bed, held the pear in the cup of her hands. If she'd eat it now, she'd have to go downstairs to throw away the pits, the core. If she ate it later, Ava might walk by, see her eat it. She did not want Ava to see her eat it. She could throw the whole thing away. She could open the window and throw it away. It was a water-heavy fruit, full ripe. The first bite spilled on Isabel's skirt. It wouldn't show. The fabric was browned and checkered. There was no way of eating it in silence. The sounds it made, the wet. Isabel ate through the whole thing, the flesh and stick, and pits and core and all. She made sure nothing was left of it, as though it had never been given in the first place. Her arms were dripping, wet all around her mouth. She had to wash her face in the basin afterward. The spot on her skirt where the fruit had stained remained throughout the day, a cloying brush to the back of her hand.
It is a very sensual scene. Thank you for sharing the famous pear scene.
Well, absolutely my pleasure.
Is that one of your favorite scenes?
Yes. It was fun to write. I knew it was coming. I had planned for it, and then when I wrote it, I think it was the last scene I wrote that day, and I had plans for the evening, but I still took a moment to look at it, and then I think I said out loud to Isabel, "Oh, you little freak," and then I closed the document. And I still think that every time I read it, I was like, "Ah," because it's the first moment where she does anything that is out of line, anything that is she consumes, right? It's the first moment that she consumes anything with abandon, and that's the first step in descent.
But when I say there's not a word that is wasted in this book, every sentence, every word in that scene brings us into it's just about eating a pear. And yet, there's so much more weight in this water-heavy pear.
Oh, it's never about just eating a pear, Rachel.
Exactly. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Yael van der Wouden, and we are talking about her brand new debut, The SAFEKEEP. So Ava and Isabel become lovers. There's this love story, this awakening of desire, and this is brand new for Isabel. She's never really, as we said, broken out of this shell. She's never really felt anything because she's been very cold. But she does have a brother who is homosexual and who expressed his sexuality at a very young age and seems very open about it, at least within the family. But Isabel is terrified to explore her sexuality in any way. Can you talk about that contrast in those characters?
I think it's not just I mean, that's a great question. It's not just about the contrast, it is how the two inform each other. She has come to know his relationship to desire and to love as something that stands in direct opposition with what she wants. Because the fact that he leaves home and the fact that he finds, a lover and that he decides, the way where he lives and how often he comes back, all of that has to do with the fact that he wants to live his life the way that he, with openness and with the ability to love. And that means that he cannot stay with her, that means that he had to leave her and her mother behind. I think at some point she says, like, just, as long as you don't talk about it, as long as you just, pretend like it's not happening, you can come back. Isn't it worth it? And for him, it's absolutely not worth it. And for her and her mother, it seems like a very easy decision to make. Obviously, how can it be worth losing us? And so for her growing up and even after her mother passes away, right? Even at the funeral, he brings his boyfriend at the time and she sees that as an extension of the betrayal. He cannot even leave the boyfriend at home for the few days that it takes to come and take care of their sick mother and then bury their mother. And so she sees the fact that he has chosen the life that he's chosen in her perspective, she sees that in direct connection with the fact that she's alone, that she's been abandoned. And so the idea eh, and then we have Louis, who's also, right, he every time he shows up with a new girlfriend and she sees them as this beacon of abandon and excess and desire, and she despises that in him. She thinks it's the trashiest, sort of cheapest thing, and she doesn't believe in friendship as well because friendships also to her seem like this insincere exchange of people just doing things for each other without actually meaning what it is that they do. And so for her to even consider her own desire would mean consider the betrayal that she's seen around her. And she also has this one moment where she thinks about it. I think this is during the lake scene. I thought of a long time where I would place that one scene where she just thinks about desire and arousal And she describes it as a sickness that sometimes comes over her in the night. Like she'd caught a cold from somebody in the shop and she didn't know where it came from. And she just had to sweat it out and ignore it. And that's a relationship to desire that she doesn't even understand. And the fact that it is that she finds that her desire is toward women, toward one woman in specific, it would not even have occurred to her because her relationship to that kind of desire has always been so wrought and so wrapped up in her own feelings of loneliness.
But in this book, The Safekeep, Isabel falls in love with a woman or desires Ava. But I kind of felt like it didn't matter that it was a woman. If it had been a man, if she'd been attracted to men, she would have the same sort of fear of her own desire. She would still be holding back.
Yeah, I mean, it matters and it doesn't matter. It matters because this is the story that I wanted to see in the world. There's especially now more and more stories of lesbians and love affairs. But what I wanted to see specifically is I wanted to see a story about a terrible woman who's undone by desire. And I wanted to have a lesbian love story where the fact that they were two women falling in love wasn't the big issue. I wanted the thing that was holding them back to be either their personalities or history at large or both at the same time. The thing that rubs them the wrong way at first and then draws them together is not the fact that they discover, oh, actually I'm attracted to women. It's something more inherent about who they are as people. But at the same time, I do take what you mean, what you're saying, because her repression isn't just gay repression. It is just general repression of any kind of desire, really, right? This I really put down to Calvinism. The way that I describe Calvinism is one time I was at a cafe and I heard this woman next to me while she'd ordered a slice of pie, and just before she dug into the pie, she turned to her friend and said, "Here we go, a little bit of sin." And I thought to myself, "My goodness, just a slice of pie is already sinning." Um, and that is what I wanted for Isabel, right? Any form of eating anything that is flavorful, any form of touching anybody that is enjoyable, anything that will bring joy to her that isn't also productive or useful, i.e., cleaning the house or putting the house in order, is considered a sin. So she is entirely repressed, and that's also why she cannot recognize desire, right? But at one point, she tells her brother that whenever she's around the neighbor, Johann, she is a little bit nauseated whenever he comes on to her or flirts with her. Her brother is like, "Oh, that means that you like him because that's how you know that you like somebody, that you know that's butterflies in your belly." And she just goes, "Oh, I suppose you're right then. I suppose I do like him." She has no connection to her own desire until she does, of course, and then as she does everything, she goes 0 to 160, from absolutely nothing to that.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from NHPR. My guest today is Yael van der Wouden, and we are talking about her brand new debut novel, The Safekeep. Yael, lurking behind the big themes of love and desire, and those are huge themes in this book, The Safekeep, is a much quieter theme around women's place and limitations on women. Isabel's entirely dependent on her brother, Louis. He owns the house that she lives in. And Ava, in a sense, is also dependent on him. This question of what is a woman's place seems front and center. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, it's a great question and one that I didn't know that I wanted to explore it until I was already, very much knee deep into it. It was several threads all at the same time. On the one hand, it was of course trying to figure out what did the 60s in the Netherlands look and feel like for women, and what were the limitations. And for this, I leaned very much on my own family and my parents. I interviewed them extensively for so many things in this book, but especially that some things I left out very consciously. For example, you will notice there's no fridges mentioned in the entire book because I I couldn't figure out for certain whether or not a woman of her stature, Isabel's stature, in the east of the country would own a fridge in 1961 already in the Netherlands. So all of that is left up to the reader's imagination. But the point is that Isabel's position in the world was a limitation that created for me as the author, it created a lot of creativity as well, because I had created this character that was immediately bound in so many ways. And to find a way to move her around was both fascinating, but also begged another question, which I wanted to explore much more consciously, which is, what does women's desire for one another, what does that look like when, first of all, there's no men present? When their attraction to one another is not considered, looked upon, experienced by any kind of male gaze. On the other hand, their entire ability, the question of whether or not they can live a life together, even before Isabel finds out about the house having been Ava's, Ava at some point says, "What can you offer me? You don't have any money of your own, except for the stipend that you have. You don't own the house." And the stark reality of, even if they would become lovers, even if they would, let's say Isabel runs away with her and they go to the city, Ava has lived the realities of a woman basically on the fringes of society with the little money that she makes working at a factory. And she lives in this draughty, humid apartment where a mushroom goes out of the windowsill. And her whole point is, first of all, she doesn't want to live like that. And second of all, she's going to get back what's hers. And Isabel is threatening to upend that with romantic notions of things that she's never experienced before. She's never experienced poverty, and she's never experienced what it means to love a woman outside of the golden cage that is the house. And those were two things that I was very much interested in. On the one hand, a woman's place in society at the time and how restrained that was, and in what ways I could move the characters around, but also two women with the absence of men, but then still the presence of the patriarchy constantly lurking along the borderlines.
I mean, it's just, to me, this question of what do they have that's their own? Exactly like you said, is that lurking patriarchy. It's not physically in the house with them, but it's in every scene.
I got quite a few questions about what tradition this book steps into. And of course, the Gothic novel is often what comes up. And what I think is interesting about the Gothic novel is that there's always the presence of the dangerous other. And the dangerous other in the Gothic novel is usually either the mad woman in the attic or the other in whatever other way. And sometimes it can also be like the queer other threatening to come in and steal like the home. And what I wanted to do with this is to flip it around, where at first the other seems like the queer other that comes in, but actually the other that is the danger is not the queer other, but rather it's the patriarchy trying to impose patriarchal heteronormativity upon the house. And then there's the other grander other, which is history itself.
I just love the way you're talking about this book, because I think this is exactly what goes to my point of what I love about your debut, The SAFEKEEP, Yael, is that the story is so simple. It's two women living in a house in 1961 in the Dutch countryside who are falling in love or falling for one another. But there's so much more there. They're just all of these layers. That's what it's about, but it's not really what it's about. And this leads me to another question that I am dying to ask you. I want to know, do you think about this book as a romance, or is it a history?
I think a psychosexual historical thriller.
Wow. I love that. I never heard that label before. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Yael van der Wouden, and we are talking about her brand new debut novel, The SAFEKEEP. Yael, we've talked a lot about these amazing themes and what's happening in the book, and I really want to shift now over to the writer's life. This is your debut, so this is the first novel that you sold, and I understand that it sold in like a 9-way auction. As a debut, that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell me about that. What's your secret?
That's absolutely no secret. Is very much what I'm finding out in this process, is that every single book has a completely different path. And that is infuriating and also a little bit freeing, because there's no way of doing it incredibly wrong. And there's also no way of doing it incredibly right. The one thing that I can say is that I have done for a long time, and that has helped me a lot, is I joined a lot of writing groups. I also went, especially during the pandemic, I went online and joined writing groups there. And I just kept in touch with people in those writing groups. We would send each other samples, we would send each other chapters, things like that. And one of the writers that I found online, we had been chatting via Instagram, I think, for like a few months. And then she said, "Hey, I have this novel and I would really appreciate your feedback or thoughts on it." And so we went back and forth on that. And then a few years later, when I finished the draft for this novel, she said, "I have an agent. Would you mind if I send your novel to her?" And that's sort of how we got the ball rolling. So if there's a secret at all, it is that being a writer should not be a solitary game. It sounds like I'm talking about networking, but I'm really talking about finding a community of people who enjoy the same stories as you do and enjoy exchanging thoughts on horrors and wonderful things about writing and reading.
You teach writing or you've taught writing. What advice do you give to your students?
The advice that I give to my students, on the one hand, is keep your fellow writers with you. The people who are going to help you further, if that's already what you're thinking about. If my students are concerned about, I don't know how to get a foot in the door and I don't know how to get myself published. What I always explain to them is the way that I started getting published is not by, shooting for the stars, but rather I had made a few friends in a writing group, and then one of those people in the writing group became editor at a literary magazine. And then when that person was looking for people to contribute, I was already right within their group of writers that they knew. And, that's how I got my first publication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I always tell them, you have to look toward your community, toward your peers, rather than think about it as a straight line. I think if you think about writing as I need to start in a dark little attic room. Well, I say dark little attic room because I, up until a week ago, was living in a dark little attic room. And then you write a brilliant, genius piece, and then you send it out, and the first agent that you query says, "Yes, let's go." But before you know it, it's in all the stores. Then you're only setting yourself up to disappointment. The way I've always thought about it is whenever I was faced with a choice, I just made sure that I chose the option that brought me closest to what I wanted to do. So, for example, I got one point to choose: do I want to do translation for a university, or do I want to do something that paid a little bit more but was a corporate job? And I chose for the translation for the university, which played badly and it was a little bit miserable, but it did bring me closer. Through there I got some contacts, and that's how I ended up teaching creative writing.
I read somewhere that you said that the way to come into writing is first by imitation, and that really struck me. What does that mean?
Well, it feels really obvious when you talk about art forms. When you want to learn how to do a certain kind of art form, be it watercolor or clay or anything, you have to first imitate something that is in front of you, something that either somebody else has done or a still life. And once you understand the form, once you understand the skill, then you can start riffing on that. And that's, for me at least, that has been always the most interesting way to come into writing. When I read a book that I think has been done expertly, the first thing is like, what has this writer done? And can I do that as well? And can I do it in a different way as well? So it's not about imitation 101, it's about the practice of learning how to do something and then making it your own and changing your own art form in response to that thing. And I think that's also what I mean in extension by writing is not a solitary thing. I think it's a conversation and it is a tapestry. And in my novel as well, you can see, I believe, all the novels that have formed it and inspired it.
Yael van der Wouden, thank you so much for joining me today here on Check This Out. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This was lovely.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. You have been listening to Check This Out, where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. This conversation is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire. I'll be back next week with Allison Esbach, author of the new novel The Wedding People. You won't want to miss it. Our producer today is NHPR's Jessica Hunt. The How Library Director is Ruby Simon. NHPR's Program Director is Emily Quirk. This show is sponsored by CNS Wholesale Grocers family of companies, the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation, and the How Library Corporation. Remember to go to your local library or local bookstore and check out all of the books you hear about here and love. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.